If you're watching this video, you are finding yourself in an incredibly stressful and bewildering scenario. You are likely experiencing things you've never had to deal with in your mortal life. In truth, these first few evenings are pivotal for you and the people around you. But I must warn you, do not attempt to capture, transmit, or disseminate this information, or utilize this production outside of our approved networks. Any attempt to subvert this private network or the data contained within will be subject to severe sect penalties, up to and including final death. Recently, you were turned into a vampire, what we collectively refer to as the embrace. We almost never refer to ourselves using the V word. That wouldn't do for a whole host of reasons. Collectively, we are known as Kindred. You and I are both Kindred. All others who've been embraced are the Kindred. The person who embraced you, your sire, has torn you from the normalcy of human life and thrust you headfirst into the dire and some say accursed existence, which will become the new norm, to use the parlance of these times. You're likely watching this due to one of two possible reasons. Either you were embraced by some impulsive soul who fled after inflicting this upon you, or some equally irresponsible individual embraced you without permission, attempted to hide the act, and has since been punished for their transgression. And now you feel an insatiable hunger unlike any you've ever felt in life, one that stirs urges in you, vile thoughts, and worse. You sleep all day and have a supernatural fear of the sun, and you simply can't keep your macchiato down no matter how many times you visit the local cafe. Oh, and yes, you are functionally immortal, meaning you don't age, you don't need to fear disease, you're physically tougher than any living person. But that doesn't mean you've figured out God mode on your favorite video game. Sure, you don't have to eat, breathe, drink water, and the like, but that does not mean this new life is free of inherent danger. Fire, sunlight, the teeth and claws of other kindred, and massive trauma will put a stop to your 5-year plan in a heartbeat. Don't walk into oncoming traffic or jump off any tall buildings either. Oh, and I've seen the movies too. No amount of sunscreen will keep you from burning in agony. As far as the other superstitions, garlic doesn't do anything, you don't need to count the rice grains, and you should be able to enter any building and cross any bridge without being invited. Stakes to the heart won't kill you, but they will paralyze you, leaving you completely immobile. Some of you watching may already have some experience with these, unfortunately. What is the Camarilla? Plainly, the Camarilla is a secret society. One part fraternity, one part government, the Camarilla was formed hundreds of years ago in response to the Great Inquisition that threatened to destroy all of us, the Kindred. In the 15th century, a massive convention of Kindred was assembled in secret in a little village in England. For hundreds of years prior, our kind fought amongst each other openly, giving rise to the legends and lore of the very real vampires that openly stalked humanity. Well, when the kind, as some elders refer to humans, began to understand the truth of our existence, their combined power was more than even the most ancient of our kind could withstand. At this convention, the various clans or families of Kindred sat down to iron out their centuries-old rivalries and create a system of governance for us all. Open warfare and infighting led to these terrible burning times, and the future of our kind was in grave peril. A treaty was signed, uniting the clans under the banner of this new organization, the likes of which had never existed before. Reasonable laws were codified for all of us to follow, 6 to be exact, which apparently trace their origins back to our biblical creation myth. These laws we call the traditions. More on those later. Like every silver lining, there were a few clouds as well. Of course, there were dissenters who refused to exist silently among humans as the Camarilla proposed. These monstrous kindred rejected the traditions and declared eternal war against the assembled convention. These bloodthirsty fiends formed their own diabolical cabal called the Sabbat, and they still plague the Camarilla to this night. As I stated, the Camarilla devised 6 simple rules for all kindred to abide by, ensuring the peace, safety, and security of our kind, as well as the secrecy of our existence. These traditions are universal, and as laws, they are absolute. The first tradition, the Masquerade. The most important tradition, the Masquerade, helps to ensure our survival as a species. Recall my earlier statement about the Inquisition and the Burning Times. Well, thanks to forces aligned against the Camarilla, we find ourselves in a second Inquisition, albeit one happening in secret, away from the public eye. Modern technology is inescapable, and the all-seeing eye of Big Brother inexorable. Violations of this tradition are taken very seriously, often with the most severe consequences. The second tradition, the domain. The second tradition typically governs the prince's right to rule. The prince claims domain over an entire city. Often, the prince will parcel out portions of the city to elders and influential kindred within his domain, granting them the right to claim domain within that territory. Technically, anywhere you stake your claim and make your haven, the place of safety where you sleep or hunt, is your domain. Without a nod from the prince, though, you're technically nothing more than a squatter. Third tradition, the progeny. The elephant in the room. You are likely a product of this law's disregard. If you haven't noticed yet, what we call unlife or the state of existence belonging to the kindred can be quite brutal. Luckily for both of us, the domain in which you reside has a more progressive interpretation of this tradition. More of our kind means more potential strain on the Masquerade, less space for hunting, and more competition in the domain. It is the duty of the elder, aka the prince of the domain, to know who dwells within these boundaries. Thus, progeny is granted to those who earn the privilege. In modern nights, with the constant threat of the Inquisition, many princes have become exceedingly conservative in their domains, micromanaging the creation of our servants, the ghouls, as well. Fourth tradition, the encounter. Again, this tradition exists to further bolster the importance of the Masquerade. The lick that brought you into the world of eternal night is also bound by jus noctis, or the laws of the night, for any actions you take. Keep this in mind if you ever have the opportunity to give the embrace. The choice to bestow this condition upon someone else should never be made impulsively. More importantly, if you've found yourself under someone else's accounting, be aware that your actions can and will impact your surrogate. Fifth tradition, the hospitality. Think of this tradition as simple courtesy at its core, with major potential consequences in the back end. When you were immortal, did you want people entering your home uninvited? For most of us, we wouldn't just let strangers come in unannounced, open up the fridge, and help themselves to the hi-fi. When you arrive in a new city, knock first. Track down the appropriate route to introduce yourself to the prince. Stand and be acknowledged. Sixth tradition, the destruction. Finally, the most potent tool in the prince's arsenal, the right of destruction. While this right used to belong to his sire for use against his progeny, i.e. you, in modern nights this right belongs only to the prince of the city. It should be clear to you that these 6 basic laws leave much in the way of interpretation. Indeed, each domain, prince, and city hierarchy interpret these laws in ways that suit their needs and desires. Laws only have significance if they can be enforced, and the Camarilla cabal of a given city must maintain this equilibrium. The lex talionis is the fulcrum on which all conflicts balance. The prince. You've heard me mention the prince a number of times in the previous chapter, and it's likely you've found yourself in front of one if you're watching this. The prince is the position of ultimate authority in a given city, and likely the most powerful kindred you will share a room with. The role of prince can be multifarious and Machiavellian, but ultimately the prince is the master of the domain. The PRIMOGEN. Typically, the PRIMOGEN are a coterie of elders within a city that assemble for various reasons. In some cities, the PRIMOGEN are the most powerful kindred to the prince's authority. Sometimes they exist to advise the prince less than to act as judicial opponents. In some cities, the PRIMOGEN council forms organically. In others, they're appointed by the prince. The position is mercurial, complex, and frequently misunderstood by neonates like you. The seneschal. Second in command, the seneschal is nearly always appointed by the prince, sometimes a trusted confidant and sometimes an unwitting cat's paw. The seneschal can be empowered to act in the prince's. In fact, the seneschal is likely to be the primary barrier between you and the prince. Often the seneschal is an elder of great influence or a favorite child of the prince. Either way, the seneschal is a figure to know and impress in the city. The HARPY. The Camarilla is a culture and community based around the feudal concept of prestation. This concept revolves around favors, social standing, and status within a domain. It may seem like an archaic concept to someone born in the 20th century, but its beauty is in its simplicity. If you need a favor, those who have it to give are obliged, and you are obliged to repay. Thus, favors are the credit of the Camarilla, and your reputation is your credit score. At the center of this system, the Harpies turn the wheel of the machine, often consisting of an influential coterie of socialites. The Harpies keep track of favors, reputations, and scandals that occur within the domain. Recently, many princes have found the position of herald to be quite fashionable. The herald is often the leader of the Harpies and speaks with the voice of the prince. At city gatherings, the herald proclaims the prince's edicts. Additionally, you may encounter a Harpy known as chancellor. In very formal domains, the chancellor is the de facto keeper of prestation, maintaining the record of boons pledged in the domain. Not every domain has a chancellor, and indeed some don't give this responsibility to just a single kindred. The Keeper of Elysium. Elysium is a location, often specific buildings, parks, or places of cultural importance where kindred may assemble without fear of violence. You must know, based on the urges you've felt since your embrace, violence comes easy to our kind. The beast is a force of instinct that each kindred work against, but can push even the most docile of our kind to brutality. Elysium permits our kind to assemble and set aside petty squabbles, politics, and rivalries. The Keeper of Elysium is the host of this location, as well as the provider of the security for these sacrosanct sites. From the moment you enter to the time you leave, the Keeper of Elysium has authority over your presence and ensures civility is maintained. The Sheriff. One part investigator and one part enforcer, the Sheriff acts as the martial arm of the prince's authority. In many domains, the sheriff acts as the intelligence gatherer, bloodhound, and the executioner of the prince's justice. These kindred are often feared, methodical, and calculating tools of the prince. One would be wise to avoid crossing them. Often, the sheriff is assisted by a coterie of deputies or hounds that operate with the sheriff's power. Other martial titles may exist from city to city, such as Scourge. If you happen to bump into this nightmare, pray you've not been excised from the domain. Beyond the structure of the individual domain, the Camarilla is governed by a council of elders known as the Inner Circle. Their representatives, the Justicars, are appointed by this council to act as their eyes, ears, and gavels. The Justicars, appointed every 13 years, are each represented by a clan of the Camarilla. Tonight, 5 Justicars act as the supreme unmitigated authority of our sect, where once there were 7. Sadly, the Brujah and Gangrel have opted to part from our consortium in recent years, while other new additions to the sect have yet to find representation among the Justicars. These potent kindred, while wielding unquestionable authority within the sect, simply can't exist in every place at once. Serving the authority of the Justicars are the Archons. These agents act with all the power of the Justicars and are to be feared absolutely. On several occasions throughout this video, you've heard me mention the term coterie. So, what is a coterie? A coterie is a small group of kindred, often with common goals or interests, united in support of one another. The coterie is the de facto assembly of kindred. Sometimes the coterie all come from the same lineage. Other times, a coterie forms from kindred who love the same music or art. Regardless of why, the coterie functions as more than just a social clique. It is a necessary method of survival. Those rare kindred who attempt to go it alone in this world find their road to be incredibly difficult, and often a short one. In this new existence, friends and allies are the most important asset a kindred can have. You could be the smartest lick in the room. If nobody knows you, respects you, or has your back, you'll find every door locked come sunrise. Act quickly and make friends where you can. I know you have questions, and rightly so. Don't worry, they'll be answered in due time. For tonight, though, you should have plenty to ponder. Keep your head on straight, mind your manners, and don't do anything stupid. I'm your surrogate sire, and I'll see you again soon.